Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody, and good afternoon. I wish to welcome everybody here today for the talk rendered by Dr. Sheikh Abdorauf. I want to welcome everybody that is online to this live talk here today. I would also want to express Mubarak on the Ramadan that we have endured thus far. I think it is one of the auspicious or outstanding Ramadans that we've experienced, since we haven't experienced anything in the last 2 years. Pertinently to the topic today, the will or succession in or post-COVID pandemic that will be dealt with by our esteemed speaker. Sheikh Muneer is no stranger to the production of knowledge in this, compared to that of what the land or the law of the land and how to bring those two together. So this is the third and the last of a lecture series in that was held here at Academia Al-Ikhlaas Library and Resource Center. I think it has been a very pleasant engagement for both people, the audience that come and visit and come and listen, as well as to those who are listening online. Part of the introduction to Sheikh Dr. Muneer is a currently serving executive member of the Muslim Judicial Council, an attorney by profession as well, and a lecturer in the law faculty at the University of UWC, University of Western Cape. One of the reasons why we encourage this type of a discussion, and this is but just the beginning of many discussions still to come, is that we can have an engagement between civil society or the society out there and our scholars, which is sometimes very difficult to bring together. Normally you would have the scholar up there and then civil society is sort of down there. And we want to utilize this type of forums, and particularly at the Academia Resource Center and the library, to have this type of discussions. And in the next 2 or 3 months, we will have a number of discussions and a number of things taking place. One of the things that will happen in very soon is the possibility of hosting the chess championship at this particular venue. And then the other thing that I think I need to emphasize is that this is a public library, and we want to let it known that this is open for the public. It's not just open as a Muslim institution or Muslim library. It is a public library, and we want to have the public to have full access to it and the full enjoyment to it. The other thing that I need to say about the library is that this time of the year we go into the pledge season, and whereby we make our appeals. And one of the things that we'll be doing as of the 1st of May would be our pledge line, and in that is where we normally would appeal to our community and people who enjoy the work that we do, to come forward and pledge generously. After the talk, we will have a few minutes and we will then hand you the WhatsApp pledge line. But for now, I think I should, before I start canvassing for the library, I think I should allow the speaker to enlighten us and to educate us and to take us onto this journey of what is supposed to be. There will be questions and afterwards. And for those who are online, please feel free to type your questions in the column, and one of our technical people will forward that question to the speaker. So with no further ado, I will call upon Sheikh Dr. Muneer to take this conversation further. Assalamu alaikum.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. All praise and thanks are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Lord of the heavens and the earth. We praise Allah Almighty. We thank Allah Almighty. We seek the assistance of Allah Almighty, and we invoke the forgiveness of Allah Almighty. Whoever Allah guides, no one can lead astray, and whoever Allah causes to be led astray, no one can guide. We bear witness that there is none worthy of worship except Allah Almighty, and that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the last prophet, servant, and messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Thereafter, I greet one and all in the universal greetings of love, mercy, and peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I thank the presenter for the beautiful introduction, alhamdulillah. I've been with him for a number of years with regard to buying books at the Institute, alhamdulillah. And may it also grow from strength to strength. And now also I venture here at the Ikhlaas Academy Library as well. Ameen, ameen. I also like to see my teacher over here as well, Mrs. Muhammad from Oaklands, not so far from here. So alhamdulillah, shukran. The topic of discussion today is basically the importance of drafting an Islamic will amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. And the reason why I've looked at this specific topic is that normally when a person gets ill, the person first gets old, and thereafter the person thinks of death, and thereafter the person asks the question as to whether or not the will is in place, is it Sharia compliant, and so forth. They get the lawyer on board, they sign the will, thereafter, whenever the time is put out, then they pass on. Now what has happened in the pandemic is that the person then was contracted with a virus. And we've seen that 4, 5, 6, 7 days later, the person passes away. So there was no time to actually call upon a lawyer to check up the will, to check for the Sharia compliancy. But as Muslims, we have witnessed that. But life on this dunya, on this earth, is not certain as far as the duration is concerned. There's no certainty that we will live until 50, 60, 70. Of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, we're looking at an Islamic will. So what is meant by an Islamic will? An Islamic will, within the South African context, is basically a will that has the effect of having the Islamic law of succession and administration of estates applicable to that Muslim living in South Africa once he or she has passed on. Now, in order to do that, the person drafting this piece of document, this 2 or 3 pages minimum, and sometimes it's written on a smaller font on 1 page even, must have firstly knowledge of what Islamic law provides. And secondly, in order to give effect to Islamic law principles within the South African context, that person should also know what the South African law requirements are in order to give effect to Islamic law. Now, once a will is drafted in accordance with those provisions, then it could be referred to as an Islamic will. So what is Islamic law all about? Now, when a person looks at our estates, there are 3 primary verses found in the Qur'an that prescribes how the estate of each and every individual, be it in South Africa or be it in Egypt, be it in Saudi Arabia, should devolve once he or she passes away. If a person passes away in Saudi Arabia, for example, an Islamic country that applies Islamic law provisions concerning inheritance, then automatically these verses of the Qur'an would find application and your estate would devolve accordingly. So let's look at these verses. We open up Surah An-Nisa, the chapter of women. Right, it's quite interesting as well that the name of the chapter is named after women. Verse number 11, one of the most controversial verses concerning the distribution of property after you pass away. In that verse, Allah speaks of لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ. For the male, the share of 2 females. Now, our discussion today is not about why a male inherits double the share of a female. We can leave that for another day. But we do know as a principle that males have more financial responsibilities. Males have more financial responsibilities, and even in the absence of inheritance, the husband has to pay for the maskawi, the dawah of his wife, if he passes away. And this is something we find in our community to be very problematic. We find that he says, "My darling, I would like to marry you." She says, "Okay, I want a house." It is her right. He says, "Yes, but I don't have a house." She says, "It's okay. I've spoken to the Imam. He says that you can pay me off." All well and good. If that forms part of the dawah and he passes away prior to registering a house, let's say of R1 million or 2 million rand on her name, she is entitled to that as a creditor. Right? That estate is indebted to her to the amount of 2 million rand prior to her receiving the inheritance. In the Islamic world, if that marriage contract or marriage certificate that you received when the Imam put through the nikah has not maybe had enough details in that regard, then that should be sorted out now. We thank Allah we did not pass away during the pandemic, but if we fall in a situation like that, and I've seen people, their marriages broke up, not maybe because of death, but even subsequent to divorce, right? These documents should be in order. The longest verse in the Quran concerns reducing an agreement to writing. So now we continue. The verse number 11 looks at the inheritance of children. We discussed it 2:1. Quite interestingly enough, the same verse refers to 1:1. Did we know that? Where Allah says, وَلِأَبَوَيْهِ لِكُلِّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمَا السُّدُسُ مِمَّا تَرَكَ إِنْ كَانَ لَهُ وَلَدٍ, that the mother and the father, the parents of a deceased, is entitled to 1/6 of the estate after the debts have been deducted and the bequests have been paid. 1/6 each goes to each parent on condition that the deceased had children. So yes, it refers to 2:1, but the verse also refers to 1:1 between parents. Verse number 12. Let's look at verse number 12. And these verses, it applies to us directly because most of us have children and some of us have parents as well. And we'll see later on the difference between a person passing away, leaving no will, and what South African law says concerning the person, as I've alluded to. On my state, I can't do that. Because in verse number 12, it already prescribes what she is entitled to. And I have no right to disinherit her, and I cannot disinherit her. Within the South African context, however, you can do so. It does become problematic, and therefore I refer to the Islamic will, the will that actually says that Islamic law should find application. Then the verse goes further and speaks about the inheritance of siblings, more specifically uterine siblings. Same mother but different father. And again, the 1:1 rules find application. It says there that if you leave behind a uterine brother or uterine sister, and they inherit, if something is referred to as kalala, where you have no children and no male ascendant that inherits, they inherit from your estate, your brothers and sisters, more specifically uterine brothers and sisters in terms of verse ayah number 12 of chapter 4 of Surah An-Nisa. 1:1, male and female, the same. The Qur'an then goes further to verse 176. And when looking at inheritance and when studying this prior to drafting your Islamic will, it might be you are ill, it might be you have COVID, whatever the situation might be, look at these verses, read these verses in this month of Ramadan. The Qur'an gives us verse 11 and 12, then it skips over 100 odd verses. Then at the end of the chapter of Surah An-Nisa, the last verse, then Allah says, يَسْتَفْتُونَكَ قُلِ اللَّهُ يُفْتِيكُمْ فِي الْكَلَالَةِ. Then Allah speaks about the Prophet receiving a question concerning kalala. In kalala, again, as in verse 12, it refers to uterine siblings. In verse 176, it refers to full siblings, the same father and mother as a deceased, and consanguine siblings, same father but different mother. And they expressly state there how the estate must devolve as far as their rights to inherit is concerned, and the 2:1 rule again finds application over there. Now, these verses were stated now by way of introduction. Now, the big question is, within the South African context, I know what the Qur'an says in terms of those verses. But let's say I have an adopted child. That adopted child does not inherit in terms of these verses. What about a child conceived out of wedlock? And I've never ever married the mother, for example. What happens to that child? There are conflicting laws concerning South African law and Islamic law in this regard. But marrying the two, you can find a solution. You can actually make use of the right to wasiyah, to bequest. And through that, you can draft your Islamic will, Sharia-compliant will, and having the child conceived out of wedlock, the adopted child, inheriting the same as any other child in the capacity of obviously male and female in the estate. So all sons will inherit the same, and all daughters, including the adopted daughter or adopted son, as well as a child that was conceived out of wedlock and who never ever married the mother. That can be done within the confines of Sharia and on condition that that bequest or wasiyah is not more than 1/3 of the net estate after all liabilities have been deducted. Very short example, person leaves behind 100,000 rand, 10,000 rand towards liabilities, his creditors are paying out, 900,000 rand left. We can make use of that 300,000 rand in favor of the adopted child, in favor of the child conceived out of wedlock. Just a practical point on that. We find that a person passes away and you have a child. And what happens here in South Africa is you marry someone and at times you adopt a child. The adoption as applied in South Africa is not necessarily Sharia compliant. Why? Because you're now taking the rights and responsibilities of another individual, of another father, for example. In terms of the South African law of succession, that father cannot inherit from this child in terms of the Intestate Succession Act and certain consequences, no rights and responsibilities. So what could happen there? Just a short example is that you marry someone, she has a child, which is now your stepdaughter or stepson. You adopt that child. And this is a practical example. You don't know who they are, but I have a case of this nature. What then happens is that when the person passes away, that adopted child now has received rights in terms of South African law. And that one right is a right, besides of inheritance, the right of maintenance. And this is not within Islamic law. After a person passes away, there's no maintenance claim against the estate. But in this example I'm looking at, there were sons and daughters, there was a spouse as well. That adopted child, not a child because the child is quite young, the mother of that child then made a claim against the estate for maintenance, and that maintenance claim could even have taken the value of the whole estate, which means that not even enough money left for the inheritance. So as Muslims living in South Africa, we should take note of the laws and how it applies to our situations. Yes, we want to have the child under our care and no one can interfere, but look at the consequences during the life of your life, and look at the consequences once you pass away and the implications for your other children. If they are not minors, then they could not maybe claim maintenance, but that other child who is not your biological child could then claim as far as maintenance is concerned. Now, going forward, if a person passes away and you do not have an Islamic will, so first look at what happens if you do not have an Islamic will, and secondly, what happens if you do have a will, but the will is not in conformity with Islamic law? What happens then? Firstly, let's look at the person not having a will. Within the South African context, and this is why it's so important to draft this will. Within the pandemic, we have seen that people passing away in a number of days after being infected. And sometimes I've heard 2 weeks back, my father's cousin, he ate his iftar, he just went and walked a few steps to his room, he fainted and he died. The next day was the janazah. It could happen to any one of us. Right? If a person passes away not having a will, not going to the hospital first and getting someone to bring a will there, checking it out, signing it, witnessing it correctly, you can pass at any point in time. If I pass away without a will, and I'm looking at the Muslims and non-Muslims, the South African law says that the Intestate Succession Act 81 of 1987 automatically finds application. Now the problem with that is that, firstly, the distribution in terms of those sections in the Act are not necessarily the same as a distribution in terms of verses number 11, 12, and 176 of chapter 4, which is Surah An-Nisa. It could be argued, yes, but they are still all inheriting. It could also be argued, as I've stated earlier on, that in terms of the Intestate Succession Act, those parents who is entitled to inherit in terms of verse number 11, right, they are not entitled to inherit with the children, as is the position in terms of Islamic law. The Intestate Succession Act says they do not inherit. So what does this lead to? Firstly, we will be held accountable to Allah for not sorting out our affairs. On the radio stations, for those here in the Western Cape, we hear so many times, do not let 2 nights pass except that you have your last will and testament written under your pillow. That hadith has been used out of context, but it does find application for us as Muslims. The actual intent of that hadith is that if you are indebted to any person, right, and there's no written agreement as to what you owe that person, as stated in the longest verse in the Quraan that speaks about credit agreements, right? If you haven't done that, having 2 witnesses, reduce it to writing and all of those things, the competency of the witnesses and so forth, if that has not been done, at least write it down on a piece of page and sign it and put it beneath your pillow, because in case you don't wake up tomorrow morning, then those creditors will be sorted out. Otherwise, when those creditors come to your house and ask your executor and your family, they might just say that, look here, right, we don't know about this. That is between you and that person on the day of Qiyamah. So this does become a big problem within the South African context, where we have not drafted our last will and testament. That same hadith that I've referred to now, within our context, I would say that we must draft that document because of the consequences that would happen if we do not, which is the Intestate Succession Act 81 of 1987. The 2:1 rule does not find application. The rights that is given to the surviving spouse in terms of verse number 12 is not the same as in terms of South African law. South African law could even lead to a situation where everything goes to the surviving spouse, nothing goes to the children, nothing goes to the parents, which is quite problematic. So that hadith concerning under the pillow or in the file cabinet or wherever in the safe, that applies to each and every one of us as far as that Islamic will is concerned. The second question is, what happens if I pass away with a will, but it is not Sharia compliant? It is basically the same as if me having no will, because if I have no will, South African law finds application. That's not Sharia compliant. If I have a will, but it's not Sharia compliant, it's again not in terms of verse 11, 12, and 176 as a primary sources of these inheritance laws. What then happens is that you and I, if we leave our estates behind like that and we pass away, it leads to fighting, right? And the families, they fight with one another. And the reality is, and my advice is, if I have to tell my son, I'm giving you this, I don't have a son, I've got many daughters. If I tell my daughter, I leave you this, and to this one I leave that, even though I might feel this is the right thing to do, for them that's not the right thing to do, and they will fight with one another. If I give it to the other daughter who feels she's more entitled, the other one will think, but I'm being unfair, and there's no end to it. But as far as these verses are concerned, Allah said, I'm taking this out of your discretion. You don't have the right over this. I'm telling you what should happen to your estate. Now, in good faith, we decide, okay, I'm giving it to my youngest son or my youngest daughter. She's in need of it. And she takes it. But now for the rest of the lives of my children, they don't speak to each other. They don't come to birthdays. They don't come to family functions. They say, but she has a house which is not actually hers. And they're fighting. At points, it has even gone as far to not attending the janazah. Why? Over money. The easiest thing to do is to say in your will, right, in order to avoid having a non-Sharia compliant will or having no will, drafting the will and saying that when I pass away, and the clause will state that my estate must then devolve in terms of the Islamic law of succession, in terms of Sharia. And that in order to give effect to that clause, that a qualified alim in Islamic law or an Islamic institution, for example, like the Muslim Judicial Council, SA, must draft and execute an Islamic distribution certificate stating who my lawful heirs are at the time of my death. Now, why is that so important? Because if I am now having 4 daughters, verse 11, 12, and 176 has certain implications as far as how that estate must be distributed. If before I die, my wife is pregnant, and I'm not aware of that, and there is a son, automatically the situation changes and the inheritance differs. So instead of me changing my will all the time, me leaving a provision like that in a will is much more easier. Yes, that provision could be challenged on constitutional grounds and so forth, but currently these provisions or these Islamic wills drafted in this way is accepted by the Master of the High Court, and many estates have been distributed and finalized on this basis. Now, to give you an example of how not leaving behind a will could be problematic. Looking at the case of Daniels versus Camwell, it's a High Court decision here in the Western Cape Division of the High Court, then referred to as the Cape High Court many years back. This person was married to his wife in terms of Islamic law, got married by the Imam at the masjid, the offer and acceptance, the ijab and qabool, and he said, qabiltu nikahaha li nafsi bidalik. They might have had a marriage certificate or not, but there was an Islamic marriage. He passes away, but leaving behind no will. The law at that point in time said that she's entitled to nothing. She had to get a lawyer. She had to institute legal proceedings in the Western Cape Division of the High Court because the executor said you're entitled to nothing. And also the master could not give her anything because the will, there is no will. And also South African law did not recognize her as a wife. After challenging that position, not accepting the Islamic marriage for purposes of the Intestate Succession Act, she was successful. But the provisions in the Intestate Succession Act is not on par or in terms of the provisions as in ayah number 12 of Surah An-Nisa, which is the big problem. So each and every one of us wives, they can claim against the estate in terms of the Intestate Succession Act now based on the Daniels versus Campbell case. That one of our Muslim sisters here in Cape Town had to fight in the Western Division of the High Court. But the actual inheritance is not Islamic compliant. And that is why it is so important to ensure that you make use of your right. The South African law grants you to freedom of testation in order to state there that we would want, when I pass away, that my estate devolves in terms of Islamic law. Even in that instance, your children might still fight. Your family might still fight. People fight anyway. But at least you will be safe. I will be safe in that grave. Because then at the end of the day, they will come to their senses. And they will say, no, but my father or my mother has done the right thing. But leaving an un-Islamic will, they will still fight, but then we will still be held accountable for that. Now, my advice would be, in light of this COVID-19 pandemic, in light of us seeing so many people passing away over the last few months and days, get our last wills and testaments sorted out. Okay, the wives is more females here. Sometimes you worry about your house, but where's my wife going to stay? Because now you're referring to I number 11, 12, 176. I'm fit as a fiddle, so it's not inheritance yet, right? As long as you as fit as a fiddle, there's nothing preventing you from doing something with that house, giving the house to your wife. That's your right. It becomes hers. And then when you pass away, it is hers. But then the question is, what happens if you die before, if she dies before you? Then you're out of a house. Okay, there is actually an answer to that, or there is a solution to that as well. You can then, if I'm the owner of a house, and I love my wife that much, I can then grant a lifelong usufruct over that property, which means that I'm giving her that house for the rest of her life. But at the same time, if for some reason, and most of the times they get upset with us husbands, when that does happen, she can kick me out because she has lifelong usufruct over the property, even though I own the property. Right? Keep that in mind as well, because we're doing a real gift to the wife of the usage of that property for the rest of her life. That option is available, but bear in mind the consequences. But if, however, she passes away before me, which means that that lifelong usufruct was only in her favor, which means that full ownership of the property and use then returns back to me. Right? So these are a few things that could be done outside of the will in order to sort out your estate. But my advice would be, at this point in time, if you have not drafted your last will and testament in terms of Islamic law, that to go to a qualified alim or those Muslims that are very much au fait in terms of Islamic law, seeing what you can do, going to a legal expert to ensure that that will that you are signing is signed correctly. Very importantly, ensure that the will is signed correctly. There are so many wills that have been thrown out that are not valid because I'm putting my son down as a witness, my daughter down as a witness because they know what I want to happen to the estate. But if they are beneficiaries, that signature is not valid. That is a problematic will. Yes, I can go to the High Court to go and challenge and to go and condone the will, but it costs money, 20,000, 30,000 rand, which comes out of the estate. So rather go to a legal qualified person, knows exactly how this will should be signed, and as a result, might cost a bit of 100 rands, but then you have a will that you are au fait with, and you have the peace of mind. When you pass away, your estate will be distributed and administered in terms of Sharia. And I leave you with a verse, which I won't quote right here and now, but you can go back and read it by yourself. And that is now, I've looked at verses 11, 12, and 176. Right? I want you to go and look at verses 13 and 14 and see what it says over there. Same chapter, chapter of women, Surah An-Nisa, verses 13 and 14, and see what it says there. If you don't draft this last will and testament in terms of Islamic law, what the consequences would be. I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to give this few words of advice. And inshallah, if there are any questions, I will then take it from there. Shukran. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Are there any questions? I think she has a question, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa
Wa alaikum
rahmatullah. Jazakallah for the lecture. Was very, very beneficial. I have a couple of questions actually. What is Sheikh's opinion about? So Sheikh explained the fact that the inheritance has to be distributed according to the exact numbers in the Quraan, in the ayah, and the Sheikh has an opinion about the situation of females having the same responsibilities as males, for example. So in our modern society, where both are working and everything. So is that something that is not possible to change, or is it something that could be understood differently?
Yeah, I'm taking one by one. Okay. Now, basically, in that instance, let's give the example of we're speaking of the males and females. I said I'm not going to basically go into detail with 2:1, but in that instance, let's say there's a husband and wife in a marriage, and look at how that applies. We say we're living in a modern society, but if you apply the laws quite strictly, so if myself and my wife, we enter into the marriage, an agreement that we are equals and all of that, but the Sharia imposes certain obligations upon me as a husband. So I have to maintain her, I have to pay for the dower, I have to pay for the house, I have to pay for the water, electricity, all of those things. But now it could be said that, okay, but she also works and she also pays towards the water, electricity, she also pays for the groceries and all of that. The difference, however, is that she does so out of an option, right? So she has the option of either doing so or not doing so. If she decides that she does want to do so, she has two choices. She can either say, look, you're right, I'm doing this because I know you don't have money. I know you're out of work for the last few weeks or months. I'm going to pay for the groceries, but I'm making a record of this, right? Which means that if you were to pass away, I'm claiming this from the estate. It's not that I'm saying that I'm also eating, but that which I am eating is actually your responsibility, so I'm going to claim it back. If I'm paying towards the bond, I'm going to claim that back. If we have a divorce, I'm going to claim that back from you. This is what you are indebted to me. So that is from a purely legalistic point of departure, that is how it should work. And the same applies when the person passes away. Then the wife says, but I'm only entitled to 1/8 of the estate, or I'm entitled to 1/4 of the estate, but I've done so much for him. I have paid for this, I've done this, the cupboards there, right? Most of the payments of the bond was paid by me. He couldn't afford it, but yes, it's on his name. Then I said, no, but then you make a claim against the estate. It is also possible that you claim the bulk of the estate, and only what little is left of the estate, that is what you claim the 1/8 of. So in reality, you are having more. But yes, there are also instances. Let's say that we're not in the modern society, but the lady is sitting at home, or the wife is at home, and she's not contributing maybe financially towards the various expenses. In that instance, there are options available to do the right thing, or basically she could have asked for the house, and then he buys the house, but it's on her name as part of the dower of the mahar or maskavi. If that was not done, then this even is not too late. If the wife says, but look here, I think that 10 rand that you paid me for my dower was not that much, they can mutually agree that no, we're increasing that to R1 million now by mutual consent, which means that he is indebted to her at that point in time of agreement of 909,990 rand. And if he passes away, she can claim that. So there are a number of ways in order to do something while you are alive. But when you pass away, the verses are quite strict and clear, and there's almost like no authorities that have been brave enough to challenge those verses. And if we go to verses 13 and 14, you will see why. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, very much. Jazakallah. May I add another follow-up question? Not really a follow-up question, but just for my understanding. So Sheikh said that if one is not sure or doesn't want to cause any trouble in the family, then for example, I could just say in my will that I'm doing it according to Islamic law. And then when I die, then people would figure out what that means. Is that correct?
What you would state is that in terms of Islamic law, so African context, it does work, and you're then instituting, you're referring to an Islamic institution or to a qualified alim. And you're also stating, because South African law doesn't want you to delegate your right to freedom of testation to another person and they can do as they wish. So you're saying that they should draft a certificate, but the restriction is it must be in terms of Islamic law. So they will go back to verses 11, 12, and 176 to work out what it is, and that will be accepted by the Master of the High Court.
Jazakallah.
Afwan.
I just, Sheikh, I don't have a question. I just need to clarify something. And you said that the mother of the adopted child, what if she lays claims for maintenance? The mother, are you referring to the adopted mother or the...
Not the mother of the child, yes, but making the claim on behalf of her child, of her biological child, and making the claim against the estate of her husband, who has also adopted the child. So if I'm marrying a lady and she has a child there, I decide to adopt that child. The child is 5, 6 years old. The child cannot institute a claim. So my wife, whatever, she then institutes a claim against my estate on behalf of that adopted child. Not for her favor, but for the favor of the child. Okay, yeah.
That's clear, thank you.
Okay, shukran.
I need this, well, this is a very broader suggestion that I want to make. And one of the things that I've been sitting in, I've learned a number of new avenues to look into, apart from the conventional estate and wills. What I need to know is there any way that you can have a course, a program, a certified program running on teaching this type of subject matter on, because this is much more than just giving some form of let's do a will and let's do something, you know, your last estate. I think we need something much more than just your last. Yeah. We need something that you've touched on about 5 items that I've never given thought of. And my paperwork seems to be somewhat in order, but now I need to go back there and look at certain things. Is there any way that we will arrive at a situation whereby we'll start a last will and testament cause? And not something from you as a sheikh, but you as an attorney, you as a doctor, as to be able to provide that at grassroots level. Because the only time grassroots level wake up is about 3 days after the person is buried. Or not even 3 days after the burial. You know, the moment the people come back from the graveyard, the fight starts already. Only because of ignorance. That's the only thing. That's the only excuse that we have. We were ignorant to the fact that we didn't. From both sides, from down there and from up here. We were ignorant to the fact that we didn't apply. So I think we need to have something whereby we have a program, part of a syllabus or something. And not just by the way, okay, fine, listen, let us just bring me the papers, I'll sort it out for you quickly. Inshallah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I can at least speak from the Western Cape. There are places where the course is taught, like I teach it at IPSA as part of a degree, so which means the 3-year degree in Bachelor of Theology. In the 3rd year, you do the module, but that is not like everyone who actually wants to do the complete 3 years. So we do find sometimes attorneys coming and sitting in as observers. We also find, like the Highlands Waqf Trust in Highlands Estate, they have a 6-day intensive workshop on the laws of inheritance, but it's like you have to take the whole week off, right, if you don't have work that week, and then you're getting all the various parts of inheritance from the beginning to end, but it's a full 6 days. We also find that there's workshops being run only looking at the actual last will and testament and assisting people with drafting and executing the wills. But I think what you're asking for is actually something very good, especially having a workshop of this or talk of this nature being workshopped maybe over a few days in answering all key aspects, maybe getting more attorneys involved and so forth, tax lawyers involved, and answering questions in that regard. I think there's definitely a need for something like that.
I can categorically state that later in the year, here at Academia Library and Resource Center, we are going to have a discussion, possibly in the form of a weekend workshop or something.
Mashallah.
But I'm going to, when after this program, I'll be sitting with Doctor and I'll be looking at other role players and see how the Academia Library can facilitate this type of thing. I've seen a similar program in countries like Qatar and the Emirates, whereby in their libraries or even in their community organizations, they have these type of discussions taking place, and possibly later in the year, in the second half of 2022. I'm coming back and we're going to have a program, a follow-up program of last will and testimony and inheritance, but something on a much broader level, inshallah. So, Jazakallah, I want to say to Sheikh Muneer. Oh, there's a question. One moment.
I just wanted to know what happens in the case where the deceased parents are deceased. Does that inheritance get distributed to the siblings, or?
Okay, yeah, so I take it the person passes away and the parents has passed on prior to that, yeah. So there again, there's a difference between South African law and Islamic law as far as that is concerned. In terms of Islamic law, if the parents has passed on, you have passed on, and that is it. The same applies with children. So you might have 2 sons and a predeceased son. The inheritance will only be distributed between the 2 sons, and the share that would have gone to the predeceased son had he been alive won't go to his children. So therefore, you have to, if you understand the Islamic law of inheritance, you can then sort that out by making use of the wasiyah, the bequest, and bequeathing to those grandchildren that 1/3, up to that 1/3 as what you want to give, and the remainder will then go to the 2 sons. The only problem is, if you did not do that, it's not that children won't inherit it in terms of South African law, and also if it's only an oral agreement, you said no, give it, it becomes very problematic. The correct way, I would say the only way to do it is to draft the Islamic will, having the provisions correct there, their names, ID numbers, and so forth, so that they will be entitled to inherit that. But to answer your question, if the parents passed away, it's basically gone. It is inherited by the rest of the beneficiaries, as stated in verses 11, 12, and 176. Shukran. I hope that answers the question.
Inshallah. Sheikh, I think you should remain there because we'll be asking you to do the closing dua. The other thing is, I just want to remind everybody again, and everybody that's online, everybody present here today, our pledge. We have a beautiful institution here, and we have a resource center that boasts multimedia, a wide spectrum of multimedia applications. We have
people coming in here doing their online projects. Internet is free. The school kids comes and do their projects. So, but all of these things needs a form of maintenance continuously. And this is that time of the year whereby we ask and we pledge and we make appeals to the public and people frequenting and the venue in general. So what we are appealing is on the 1st of May on channel 346 on DSTV at 9 p.m. Our pledge line will be going live, possibly till about in the early hours of the morning. Our WhatsApp line is currently open and for pledging, so you feel free to go and make your pledge there. I'm appealing specifically to the broader community and our online community. It is a place that we want to take to the next level. Already people believe that the Academia Library and Resource Center has already achieved so much in a very short time. But we have much more in mind. In a couple of days from now, we will be hosting the South African Chess Championships right here at this venue. It's a very prestigious event, and we want to make sure that we have the event and that we can showcase it from academia like any other institution out there can. And then, of course, we're looking at live streaming it. We're looking at boxing it, whereby you can see a digital play format on your app or on your phone or on your computer. So there's a lot of things that we intend doing. So, but that all depends upon the pledges that is made and so on. None of this is basically out of pockets, but out of the pockets of those who felt the need or who see the need to have sponsorships coming in, to see the need that the library needs to be maintained, and so on. So we have a number of pledge projects running, the legacy program, whereby you can become part of a book legacy, have your name or the name of your passed on sort of dedicated. For example, all these shelves is individually dedicated by families. And I think it is a beautiful part of inheritance.
Yes,
Can that also be? That I would like to see my father's name, and this I'm donating to. So in the inheritance, in your will, make sure that you have lasting. I want to say life cover. That you have lasting sadaqatul jariyah cover in the form of the library, in the form of the things that we do here. So follow us on Facebook, follow us on YouTube. If you haven't have your number down as a WhatsApp subscriber, you can pass it down to me or pass it down to Iman, and we will add you to the list. And you will be able to get regular, very, very regular update as to what's happening. So do not forget our pledge line, the 1st of May, opening up at 9 p.m. And possibly till the early hours of the morning. And inshallah, for those, if we do not see each other again, for those our online audience who have joined us all over the world, including those in the UK, Europe, in the USA, we say thank you for tuning in. And if we do not speak again before that, I would want to wish you each Eid Mubarak and have a beautiful day. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh from the Academic Library in South Africa. Sheikh, you can do the closing to our.
الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم ربنا زدنا علما وارزقنا فهما واغفر لنا ذنوبنا وذنوب والدينا ولمشائخنا ولجميع المسلمين أجمعين. اللهم رب يسر ولا تعسر، رب يتمم بالخير وأنت يا الله الكريم الميسر. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وأدخلنا الجنة مع الأبرار. يا عزيز يا غفار يا مولانا يا رب العالمين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اصبروا وصابروا ورابطوا واتقوا الله لعلكم تفلحون. وتمت كلمة ربك صدقا وعدلا لا مبدل لكلماته وهو السميع العليم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. ما شاء الله، شكرا لك.